today's topic is going to be on carbon offsetting and role of blockchain. As we all know, the carbon offsetting can help in curbing climate change. However, given the recent trust deficit in the voluntary markets, it is evident that it requires a more robust framework. But underlying challenges such as transparency and verification remain a key areas of focus. So while blockchain is a good proposed solution to most of the core problems, can it actually help to regain the trust? So we have our esteemed panelists and two of us joining from the remotely. So to start off with the first question, how does the blockchain can help in bringing more transparency, or how do you define the transparency, parameters for the transparency, Jaye, to start off?
I get to go first. Thank you. Thank you for having us. We're based in Africa. I just came back. Talk about transparency. There's very little over there, yet their assets are what are sustaining the climate, right? From minerals to carbon. So we're actually putting in blockchain, and we've been over there 8 years, to provide transparency at the country level, because there are a lot of registries. There are a lot of players in this all over the first world, but in the developing world, they have no clue what's going on. So we're providing the blockchain solution to crawl through and aggregate all these disparate data sets to let them have the power of their natural assets in their own country.
So Alexey, what is your take on defining parameters for the transparency in blockchain?
Yeah, so blockchain is one of the most, transparent technologies out there, right? And we need this transparency in carbon markets because there's been many issues regarding that. And, we need transparency, I guess, at every step. So we need to know all the stakeholders. We need to know what they did along the value chain and when, because it's sometimes is very important for carbon and other financial instruments. And I guess I'm a more of a radical person here. I think the more transparency we can get, and the more traceability along the value chain we can get, and the more immutability we can get, the better it is for the whole carbon market, because we can bring trust, and we can eventually connect the originators of carbon credits and the end users, because for many years the trust issue has been a problem that actually avoided the contact between the producers and the end users, and blockchain is one of the technologies to enable that long-awaited interaction.
Thanks for that, Alexey. Josh, what is your take on how blockchain can help in bringing more transparency? I know you're developing a project within carbon offsetting, so yeah.
Yes, I am. And as you know, and we've discussed, we believe in going beyond basic requirements, right? But in terms of leveraging blockchain to address these issues, it's really interesting that this is probably the best use case for the use of blockchain that I can think of. It's so apparent, frankly, all the market participants, that that distributed ledger technology and blockchain technology broadly is a perfect sort of hand in glove fit for the problems in this space. Not going to say that it's a panacea for everything, but it certainly offers unique ability to bring the much needed transparency and accountability to address the issue of waste, fraud, and abuse in the space. Some of which, frankly, I would add, people use the terms waste, fraud, and abuse often, but I think it's goes beyond even just intentional bad actors. I think there's a lot of well-intentioned bad actors, and there's overcrediting and all of this that we know is problematic in the space. But leveraging blockchain to drive more effective creation and management of carbon credits and offsets broadly is really paramount, I'd say, in the approach that we take as an industry to address these issues. Carbon credit transactions would be trackable in real time and documented using a decentralized ledger, enabling us to address issues of fraud, and obviously also verify retirement, things like that. I think there's so many applications. The question becomes, who's going to bring forward the the platform that really gets enough scale and drives enough adoption. I think adoption is a fundamental challenge. It's not necessarily, and I'll just wrap with this on this point, it's not necessarily is the blockchain offering effective solutions. It's really how are we going to drive adoption of a single solution or a single set of solutions to drive more consistency across the market, because I think it's just some of these issues are issues of a nascent market.
Thank you so much, Josh. And Benoit, what is your take on behalf of Vera?
Yeah, there's definitely interesting use cases for distributed ledger technologies, generally speaking, whether it's looking at how you can help a registry meet its double counting provisions and procedures in order to meet ICVCN and CORSIA requirements, whether it's you want to be able to have credentials and all project data recorded in a transparent and queryable fashion. Yeah, there's definitely some really interesting use cases. And coming back to Josh's point, it's, how can we increase adoption of these technologies? It's blockchain and crypto and a lot of these words, while they're, exciting technologies, they're also sometimes very polarizing when you're speaking to leadership of various companies, and it's sometimes challenging to get people on board. So there's certainly some really good work that's being done out there. And at the same time, what generally makes headlines is all the not so good stuff. And that kind of makes, more conservative voices louder. So it's a challenging obstacle to overcome. At least I see that as being one of the obstacles when we think about adoption. And then also regulatory concerns. The space is evolving very quickly, and we're seeing all kinds of news headlines that are heading and hinting different directions. And so it's going to be curious to see how the space evolves. And I think this is also going to be potentially another barrier to adoption is, these regulatory concerns.
Thanks for that, Benoit. Appreciate it. So since these voluntary carbon markets are unregulated, can we actually expect more challenges in carbon offsetting disclosures? I mean, there's so many players out there. And there is a bit little harmony. I mean, there's literally no harmony, actually. How do we see this, Jaye, to start off with you? Yeah.
So we're masters at breaking down data silos. This is what we've done. We've done it for the last 8 years throughout Africa, pulling together government data in 8, 10 different ministries. So when we look at the climate in one country we're working in right now, there's 22 ministries that have a little bit of something to do with the climate. So to us, chaos is no big deal. Data is data. We pull together these disparate data sets. When you need blockchain, we'll use it. But again, it has a high carbon footprint too. Don't forget about that. So what we try to do is we don't care where the data comes from. We don't care where the chaos is and the unregulation, because to us it's data. We pull it in as needed, whether it's structured or unstructured. We use AI. We use data visualization for complete transparency and traceability from the very bottom to the communities all the way to the very top to the buyers. And I think you can't say there's going to be a framework and we're all going to get behind it and adoption. You have to build it. It has to be flexible because we're never going to be on the same framework. That's a pipe dream. That will never happen. So you have to be very flexible in what you're doing.
Alexey, what is your take from Evercity?
Yep. I think voluntary carbon markets have been largely inspired by the ongoing UN process. And it's very important to follow what's going on there. So we all know that the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is going to define a lot of new rules for the carbon markets. So maybe a lot will be coming, from there, and that's a good benchmark. Also, we've seen some attempts of the market to self-regulate and provide like universal rules for carbon, carbon markets. And that's a really great initiative, although I know that many people thought that it could be like a bit more than what has been released, but it's definitely the right way. So yeah, I think it's self-regulation. It's looking at at where the world is moving, and yeah, the innovation pathway, and talking together, defining the new rules, like in all the other markets. Learning from experience of other markets. What worked there would work here as well.
Josh, what is your take on this bit?
Well, I think the issues of data are key, right? It all comes down to the specifics. I know we've talked about this before, Kalyani, but I think about the bond market, right? And I look at that and I say, with the rating agencies, people over time, we took these completely different sets of assets, right? I mean, you could take a bond from, a bond from a Ford, and you pair, and that gets one rating versus something versus, let's say, a bond issued by, IBM or what have you. These things that are completely different industries, or something that, AAA versus triple B versus triple C. So you look at all of this and you say, they created a relatively fungible market. Interestingly, with the advent of rating agencies, out of things that are entirely non-fungible. And the challenge ahead of us was a point of measurement, right? To a large extent. I know I'm oversimplifying. But in theory, a ton of carbon should be a ton of carbon should be a ton of carbon. We have a long ways to go to get there, right? Because it's obviously a heavily nuanced and every avoidance versus reduction, there's a lot there. We would be here for years if we try to unpack that right now. But I think that working towards a standard that allows the kind of flexibility required is a worthy endeavor, because if it could be done in that kind of a market, surely we can get there, or at least make great headway in this market, right? Where we're actually just trying to address what's in concept, a relatively simple objective of removing a ton of carbon and describing a 1-ton offset or credit to it. Of course, that's easier said than done. Blockchain is unlikely to be the be-all, end-all answer to that. Measurement is key. And to that end, I think it's incumbent on all the stakeholders in the sector to do their part, to go beyond, here are the minimum requirements, here's my formula. I know at Carbon Ethic, the focus is on holding the projects to a higher standard above basic verification requirements. They're, applying technology to get to sub-centimeter accuracy. That's certainly not what's required to get a project credited, but it's something that is an ethos that the project developer has to hold itself to. Similarly, buyers need to be careful and need to be thoughtful about the rigor they're putting on the project developers or the sellers of their credits. So I think it's incumbent on the entire ecosystem to work together to develop a flexible, comprehensive framework to the greatest extent possible. Maybe a pipe dream, but what can I say? I'm an optimist. And secondly, I think it's incumbent on the buyers, the sellers, and the intermediaries, and the project developers themselves to really work together to bring greater data transparency. Lastly, you can't hide behind the registries and say it's all on the registries, or you can't just kick the registries and say, they're not doing a good enough job. We all need to do this. We're at the beginning of a very long road, and we all need to do our part to elevate the standards.
Thanks for that, Josh. Benoit, what is your take on this particular point?
Well, yeah, just to echo Josh's sentiment, this is the beginning of a very long road. When I think about, I'd frankly feel that standardization is important. I see that ICVCM and the ratings agencies and these initiatives are pooling together to try and develop a standard to create a greater ease for market demand to be able to participate in VCM. There's a lot of entities that don't want to engage when they don't have an internationally accepted standard on what it means to have quality, or what is an acceptable carbon credit. There's a lot of reputational risk. These concerns about finding themselves in a situation where they buy a carbon credit that's good today and next year it's, invalidated or downgraded, and then they get a whole bunch of media frenzy around that, and that creates a lot of discomfort, and it just pushes buyers away from engaging in this kind of area. So if there was, I feel like if we really want to see market scale, you need to be able to look at creating standardization. I sense that, focusing on the sort of topic of this conference in general, I think there's opportunities where the integrity of the information and the auditability of it can play a role that helps serve as one of the vehicles to get us to some level of standardization. It requires being able to have things be readily and rapidly comparable to be able to draw common denominators and develop those kinds of standardizations. But if we continue to see fragmented markets, more and more registries coming into the system every other week, it feels like I don't think this is going to build any kind of buyer confidence when there's just way too many things on the menu, and they feel like they can be at risk of receiving flack for going with any of those choices. So I'm hopeful for the roles that these technologies can play. I hope that players in this space continue to play the long game and choose benefits over short-term rewards. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of potential and opportunity here, and it's going to require some significant collaboration and patience.
So Benoit, you mentioned a very good point. So many registries cropping up every other day. I've mapped around 21 registries globally, and I'm actually looking into their questions and the due diligence procedures. That's actually my next question. So we know that each country is coming out with their own registry, national registries, then we have a standard registries, and then there is a substandard registries coming up. Then there is a classified registries which have different classifications for biochar, then for renewable energy. So we all know that they're not that transparent enough. I mean, there's no science backup for most of the registries, and they clearly lack harmony. So for example, the due diligence work I'm doing with a project developer in Kenya right now, it's such a Herculean task to understand which one shall I go for. But there is no such thing as monopoly. I mean, everyone seems to be like, they're the best, but because it's not regulated, one thing. Number two, there's lack of harmony. Do you think there should be something should be done to create a harmony and, to decrease, to reduce that pressure, for the project developers to come out who are seeking a genuine solutions, and who want to trade like a realistic carbon credit. How do we see this, Jay? You being a project developer, I'm sure you must have gone through this kind of procedure before.
Yeah, we actually wear both hats, both the technology side and then also project development, because we just saw a lot of weaknesses in that space, and there's quite a lot of demand, right? And not a lot of supply. So what we're seeing, we're not seeing national registries. We actually have talked governments out of that. We think that's redundant. More registration, so that you can say, I have a Vera project, I have a gold standard project, I have American Carbon Registry. Wherever everybody already has their frameworks and registry, why create more paperwork, more consulting fees, more expense? Just a registration, a simple registration that said, in this country, we have 17 projects going on across 5 different registries, so the countries have transparency into what is going on in their country with their assets. They have a right to know. I can go to every president, and this is why I'm in this space now, because I only work at the president level, and I will ask them, have you sold a carbon asset? And they're like, no. And I'm like, well, sir, on this registry, you sold this for us for 30 years. He goes, no, I did not. Yes, you did. But but they don't understand it. So we've talked everyone out, at least in Africa, of national registries, national registration, because that is more important for them to get the transparency. Again, we don't want to recreate more and more frameworks and more paperwork. So that's what we're doing on the African continent. I can't talk about other ones.
Alexey, what is your take on this creating a harmony?
Yeah, I think a lot has been already been mentioned, right? Maybe some of the topics we have not mentioned is that we will have multiple registries. Let's face it, right? And maybe it's good because it provides like competition. And the carbon space used to be a bit more like oligopolistic before, and now it's changing. And I think it's for the good because all of the members are trying now to innovate. I guess, going forward with the integration initiatives, there could be like apart from joint principles, there could be like some interoperability mechanism where we can, ideally connect all of the registries and establish like joint rules how we, exchange data among those registries. And here we also have the technical issue because, not all of the blockchains are interoperable, and there are also non-blockchain registries. So I think this is should be a very big focus of the community. And also, I want to touch base on the blockchain native, carbon credits and registries and standards. So I think innovation has a lot to do here, and maybe we would be seeing, new initiatives popping up that would be like more credible, supported by many stakeholders. And I truly think that there is a room for such kinds of innovations. And I think today at this conference, we've heard some of the attempts to do so. And it's great that we're here together, discussing that. So that's already a good step towards, a more efficient carbon market and registries.
So do you think it's good to have more registries coming up? That's what you think it's?
I guess it's a healthy thing for every market. Innovation has to come and has to prove that it's more beneficial. If users will find it beneficial, if countries will step in, if we'll have a consensus around new ways to track this data, and it will make sense also with other components of the ecosystem, then why not? But also again, we need to establish interoperability, and for that we need to talk, for that we need to integrate and push this topic forward.
Josh, do you agree with the point? It's more number of registries or less, or do you think it should be more number of registries but more harmony?
Well, if you could have more registries and more harmony, I don't know how you accomplish that. I mean, I think Jaye made some really great points as far as the African continent is concerned, and I think that's instructive broadly, because obviously it's the developing nations to a large extent that have to be considered. I mean, that's obviously written into the Paris Agreement pretty pointedly. It's a basic tenet. But I think, look, I'm old enough to remember smoking sections on airplanes. It doesn't work, right? You can't necessarily, this is a global problem. You can't contain it. So these silos, these regulatory silos of one country defining its own rules are not really going to address the issue. It just exacerbates the issue. And frankly, the work being done internationally to address this issue requires some consistency. You need, developers need to be able to operate in different countries and different locations and bring best practices that, without being overly bogged down in a completely unpredictable and inconsistent regulatory qualifications. It just doesn't work. So I think as far as one versus many registries, going back to that question, I think or verification bodies, I think the buyers will often dictate that. I think that, whether it's Disney, Lavazza, Gucci, whoever that are participants in this market and have been burned by bad credits, right? By bad offsets, rather. um, their level of confidence in the registries is what's going to drive the number of registries that actually make a go of it, and in this industry, right? Just as you don't have an innumerable number of ratings agencies, the bond market, right? Truly, in the early days there were more, and there are certainly many analyst shops, that there are only the stamp of S&P, the stamp of Fitch, et cetera, are the ones that carry weight with the institutional buyers. And institutional buyers are probably, and we see it, frankly, in our business. People ask for registered credits. If that can always be the case, I don't know, but that stories that coming out, like the Guardian articles or what have you, haven't necessarily, there's no better solution that has been put forth per se that gives the institution a better starting point than I'd see. Whether that's it's almost a necessary versus sufficient argument, right? It's a starting point. It gives them a stamp of approval that they can at least hang their hat on as institutional buyers.
So Benoit, how do you see that? I mean, Vera being a very leading, registry, do you think it's going to be more competition to Vera with so many names cropping up every other day?
I think there's lots of different ways to deliver greater value to customers, and I appreciate that benefit to Alexey's point. But I don't think coming up with new registries is the only way to create better value for customers for the voluntary carbon market. I think that might be one of the ways, but I don't think it's the only way. I like to sometimes think in terms of analogies. I think about how, here in California, if you want to drive a vehicle, you have to pass a smog check. That's set by an authority that determines what are the acceptable criteria for that. Now, if we had, let's say, 15 or 100 different ways that you could conduct a smog check, well, maybe some of them work pretty well and maybe some of them really don't. And so you'd find yourself with very differing results of car performance that would be out there on the roads. You'd have some that were, really not polluting in comparison to others that would be blowing out, lots of terrible pollutants. So it's, again, like thinking about, we're talking about the balance sheet of natural capital on this planet, which is, at least as important as like a car polluting. Perhaps a lot more important than that. So I think like long term, it'd be great to see a consortium where you've got all parties that are helping construct the methodologies, that are constructing the processes, that are all participating in the governance. But I think when you start fragmenting all of those bits and pieces together, I think it generally just makes it more difficult for new entrants to come into the market and participate.
Thanks for that, Benoit. Appreciate that. So I often hear, even from my current project developer in Kenya I'm working with, that the carbon registries lack, there's a lot of, difference between the country level reconciliation and project level, especially when it comes to GHG inventories. I think it's a very pressing problem that most of the project developers they face, especially being given, they're asking for baselines in most of this GHG. It's a very big challenge. So how do we actually reconcile carbon registries with country reports in annual GHG inventories, especially when you don't have the required figures, that registries ask for, for the pre-due diligence questionnaires? How do you start with that, Jaye? You as a developer, where do you see it should be the best? How do you want to put the best foot forward on that?
So we don't do forest. So that's where that comes in. So this won't be relevant to me, but we have 20 years of data of that. There's a lot of data out there. They've been doing it a long, long time. So it's not hard to get a baseline. We do more actual see it, feel it, touch it, carbon generating, sequestration, carbon capture projects. So I'm not the right person to ask about that.
Okay. Sure. So Alexey, what is your...
Yeah, I also doubt that I'm the right person. We have some people from the UN here. Maybe, Gach, you want to say something? Or Alexander?
Yeah. Do you want to say something about how do you reconcile? Or maybe I could take, yeah.
Yeah, what can I say? The that's a trend and a need to reconcile national inventories, GHG inventories from countries, and align them with their NDCs, so their national plans,
Yeah.
and the trends, and also the long term emissions development strategies. So all this documentation, they need to be somehow coming together. And one way of doing that is the current way, which is self-report from countries. But what we are looking into are also new technologies to do that. So the alignment could be done also with direct measurements from satellites and things that are coming online. So, for example, initiatives like climate trace, I think they're very promising. Yeah. So at the last COP27, Al Gore was presented that initiative together with some country representatives discussing the enhanced transparency framework. So that's one way of aligning. My name is Alex Paris, and I'm with the UNFCCC Secretariat.
So Ben, how does Benoit looks into this when it comes to reconciliation? Yeah.
Could the question be repeated, please?
Sorry? Can you hear us? Hello?
Could we have the question be repeated?
Oh, sure, yeah. So how do we reconcile the carbon registries with the country reports in annual GHG inventories? It's one of the most pressing challenges right now with the majority of the project developers in afforestation and reforestation projects.
Yeah, not a lot of my time at Vera is spent on that particular focus. I mean, I imagine there's going to be components of Article 6 that are going to help address this because it's largely focused on accounting. I don't have more comment that I can make on that at this time.
Josh, do you have any comments on this question? I mean, you as a project developer, how do you see? I mean, is the GHG reconciliation is a very big challenge for you when you do a registration?
Yeah, it's not really part of my role, I would say, so it's hard for me to comment on that. I think, sorry, everybody's passing the buck on this one. It's a tougher one for me to comment on.
So going forward, we only have like last 10 minutes to go now. So going forward, what do you think the best practices in carbon disclosures and also with the baseline data in general, especially when it comes to blockchain? And where do you think the blockchain can play a massive role in the best practices? Doesn't matter whichever project it is, it could be afforestation, it could be cooking stoves, or it could be biochar overall,
I mean, it's complete.
You could talk about from your
transparency.
head.
So it doesn't have to be blockchain, right? It's for the end buyer to see what the project did and what the communities benefit and the whole transparency all the way down. From I'm Volkswagen, I bought carbon credits, and this local community received the benefits it was supposed to get as I drew a line around their forest. It truly is that transparent traceability all the way from beginning to end. And it doesn't have to be blockchain, but it can be, because that brings together disparate data sets. So that's where we use blockchain, is when you need to pull in data sets that are disparate and you want that same group of people to share in that data. So that's what I see as the future and what we're working on.
Alexey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So first of all, the first thing to align with the existing and reputable standard, or if you're innovating, then stand on the shoulders of giants and don't try to reinvent the wheel. That's a very important one. Then next, of course, transparency, traceability, immutability. If you can use blockchain to show the chain of trust and all the actions of all the stakeholders, this brings, of course, additional trust and transparency. That's great. On the issuance side, again, innovations are possible now. There are new ways to provide early stage financing for carbon projects, which to me brings like more value to those carbon credits because it's kind of ex ante financing with ex post, and projects can do more with carbon forward financing, for example, or if you mix debt instruments and carbon, that's the best practice. That's something really, really interesting, something that we are experimenting with. And finally, of course, on the MRV, there are all sorts of monitoring tools and opportunities right now, and also AI. It's still very unclear how to make it profitable, but it's very exciting and brings a lot of opportunities. So I guess here I would encourage everyone to innovate, provide various ways of monitoring for various project categories, and share that. And that's what will contribute to our joint future, a more sustainable future, of course. And the best practice, I think one of the outcomes of today's discussion is that we need to talk, we need to self-organize, we need maybe more meaningful consortiums where we actually do things rather than talk, We integrate our registries, we develop common rules, we showcase MRV practices, and include them into kind of the best practice expertise. And of course, conversations with every stakeholder. Either these are corporates, NGOs, national states, and of course, UN. And I think UN has to play an important role here, sharing the experience and leading the way forward.
Josh, what is your point of view? Yeah.
My point of for me, I think the MRV is key. I mean, it comes down to data again. I keep saying that, but that's the key, right? We all have to really, we really have to drive towards MRV methodologies and technologies that really attack the issue of data granularity and transparency, right? So that's why you look at Carbon Ethic, which obviously I'm partnering, and we apply a lot. We built our own tech stack to say, okay, we're going to go beyond the basic crediting standard requirements, the applicable registry. We're going to really strive towards some sub-centimeter accuracy in the forest that we're in our projects. Right, we're looking to get far beyond what is the base level to get a credit. We're looking to go to the real issue of how do we address the problem of our forest dying? How do we address the issue of the current state of affairs where we have 50% of the forest we used to have on this planet? That's a real problem because we believe that rehabilitating those habitats from a biodiversity perspective and from a forest health perspective will have the intended effect of carbon removal, right? Obviously it will. So we really look at it. We don't look at it and say, okay, this is just our baseline. Great, we got our project credited. We look at what's next. How are we going to improve the health of that forest that we're sequestering even more carbon? And I think, and of course, then we're developing our own technology to be able to really, we're building as Kalyani, as we've discussed, as I've discussed Kalyani, we're building a suite of solutions to better support more broad this industry, right? And that comes back to what Alexey said, frankly, about us all coming together to bring our best practices, action, do something, put them into real practice. That's why at Carbon Ethic, we're looking to do things at large scale so we can drive adoption of our approaches and at a broader scale across the market and offer that support out to other project developers, be it financing, support, and where we're building at Ethics Stream, where I'm focused, or whether it's really refining and rolling out, applying in our own project, our Woodwoods.ai product, and then offering that out to the broader market of project developers so that we can see better support them and bring better quality projects. Right? I think most people in this industry are not setting out with a fraudulent intent. I think this industry is generally defined by people, or comprised of people who are intentful about wanting to address the climate change problem and bring forward good projects. We just need to harmonize our approaches, share, and elevate the entire industry.
I just wanted to add like a short thing, but which is really a best practice that helped us to move on forward, and collaborate with all the stakeholders around the globe. That's open source. And open source can really bring trust and can really help people to, build on top what has already been built, and don't waste resources on recreating all over again the essential parts that we need for the ecosystem. And that's also the answer, how we can collaborate with the UN, with corporations and everyone else, and also bringing transparency and trust, because everyone could see and review the code.
So, Benoit, what is your take on the best practices? Sorry, Josh, you're sharing something.
No, please. Yeah, just along the lines of what Alexey said, I think some of that comes down to the larger institutions and governments too. I know the Biden administration, and discussions I've had, has been very frank and direct about its intent to accelerate, frankly, any advantage it can offer to companies involved with the climate economy, as it's termed it. Whether that be fast track to patents from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, whether it's greater sharing of data from NOAA. There's a lot there that they're trying to push forward, and they're looking for engagement from our industry. And then others, there's a lot of latent technology to some extent within a number of the larger companies, as you all know. And I think engaging with those companies to unleash some of that technology into the market and open source it to an extent. We've had some promising discussions. I did my work on the American Bar Association's Climate Change Committee, Clean Tech and Climate Change Committee, where they're looking to really bring forth some of these technologies. I know HP has approached us on that, and there are a few others. And I think these are the kind of initiatives that could really advance what Alexey's point.
So, Benoit, what is your take on the best practices on behalf of Vera?
Yeah, if we're focused on the sort of data and blockchain angle of this, I think interoperability and creating standardization, whether it's schemas, processes. I mean, it's, again, to try to move away from fragmented efforts that cannot communicate with one another is going to be, I think, the most effective way of turning a snowball into an avalanche. If we want to reach scale, we got to be approaching this in a collaborative manner. On the project development side, it's been my experience that DMRB is absolutely critical. MRV is one of the most biggest pieces of criteria when buyers are looking at making purchasing decisions. Co-benefits also along those lines as well is a super important criteria for buyers to engage with this market. And when you look at the opportunities there, the more co-benefits you can stack into a project, the greater resilience, the more different revenue streams. And if you can couple that with, other co-benefits like clean water and biodiversity, etc., you're building a more robust web to support that project. And you're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're diversifying your risk across multiple different revenue streams and creating greater social and environmental resiliency. I think it's generally a best practice to try and move away from silver bullet, isolated solutions, and to work more towards complex systems for those resilience opportunities. At the same time, it's important when you're engaging in those kinds of complexities to think about how the technologies that you're deploying can be constructed in a manner that makes them interoperable. So finding ways to embrace complexity for risk diversification and resilience, while also approaching that in a format that is interoperable to further enable collaboration.
Sure. So it's time to wrap up, but any questions from audience?
Thank you. My name is Kajanan Hegde from UNFCCC Secretariat. I just wanted to address that question on reconciling with the country inventory. Right now, there are two terms being discussed under Article 6 of the carbon markets. One is the ITMOs, internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. So that is when the countries choose to generate credits within their own jurisdiction and then transfer outside. But there is also mitigation contribution units. So the second one, they are not going to transfer outside of the country. So they are not going to make any entry in their inventory for the mitigation contribution units. So the big discussion now ongoing is whether the voluntary market should also get involved with the ITMOs, where countries take on the responsibility of transferring, which means when they transfer the credits out, they will have a negative entry in their system. So they will be fully responsible. It's no longer the case where they only have the win-win situation by transferring the credits. So they will have to acquire if they fall short of the their own targets. So it's a big question to the countries. What is the cost of generating certain unit, and then whether they should keep it for themselves or should they give it out? So that's an ongoing debate, and also there is a lot of dilemma to the countries. But we believe going forward with some experience gained, this issue will get a clearer picture. Thank you.
Any questions? Any more questions? Or I think we can wrap it up. Thank you so much, Benoit and Josh, Alex, Jaye. Thanks for not. Also.